When I felt something grab my boat in the middle of the dead lake, my breath caught, because I knew this was no fish. The air was flat and wet, the kind that sticks to your throat. The oar made a small, tired creak, and then the hull lurched sideways as if a fist under the water had pulled it. For a heartbeat, I just stared at the dark, and the dark stared back. I told myself it was a snag, some drowned branch, a trick of old nerves. I even laughed once, dry and thin, and said out loud that I should go home. I thought that was the end of it. Then the boat dipped again, harder, the bow nose down like something weighed it from below. I threw my weight across the planks to keep from going over. My knees banged the seat. The lake answered with a hush that made the sound of my breath feel too loud. I tasted metal. I set the oar to push away and felt nothing but slick water, no bottom, no log, nothing I could blame. The quiet pressed in, thick as the thin morning fog that lay low over the lilies. I leaned over the side, careful, telling myself not to look and still looking. The water was the color of old glass. Right beneath the skin of it, a paler shape moved and vanished. I blinked hard, then it came again, slow and certain, and my mind reached for the only word it knew and hated the word as it found it. A hand. Not a fish fin, not a paddle of a turtle. A hand, pale and jointed, with web between what looked like fingers. It brushed the hull as if testing me. I whispered a name, though no name fit what I saw. The lake has a way of eating sound, but my whisper came back to me anyway, like I had prayed into a church with no roof. My chest tightened. This place raised me, taught me how to breathe, and yet in that moment I felt like a stranger trespassing on someone else's porch. I told myself, people do not live out here. Nobody swims these waters. The old stories are just stories. I wanted to believe that so badly I almost did. The boat turned a little, not by wind. Something guided the nose toward the reeds. The lilies parted with a soft, wet hiss. I kept thinking of that shape, the way it moved with purpose, not wild thrashing, not panic. It felt like a decision. My hands began to shake, not from cold, but from the kind of fear that knows your name. I remember the smell of algae and mud, the small pop of bubbles against the wood, the way my pulse started to beat in my ears like oars against a dock. I tried to take control, to make it ordinary. I set the oar and pushed. The blade skipped. The boat barely answered. Another brush against the planks, a slow drag as if a palm slid along the grain, then a tug, steady, not cruel. Whoever or whatever was down there was not letting me drift back to open water. It was leading, and that idea made my mouth go dry. Things in the wild do not lead you. They flee you, or they fix you in their sights. This was neither. A small sound rose from the reeds, a thin chirr, or a whimper, or my head making a noise it needed. I held my breath to hear it again. The lake held its breath with me. I thought of all the mornings I had spent here since I was a boy, how the water kept my secrets and I kept hers. I told myself I owed this place nothing and everything at once. I said I would give it one more second, and then I would row hard for shore. I bent lower, as if bowing, and the surface gave up a little more of the shape, the webbing, the knuckles, the pale underside, and then the turn of a wrist. Not a threat, a signal. My throat closed. It is a wild thing to feel watched by something that should not know how to watch. I felt small and seen, and a little ashamed of every time I had believed I understood this lake. I pulled my arm back to steady the oar. The wood slipped in my wet palm and knocked the side, a dull thud that sounded too much like a heartbeat. The shape sank, vanished, and for a breath, I almost convinced myself I had imagined all of it, that the morning had played a trick on an old man. I even let out a breath I was holding on to like a rope, but the hand took the boat again, this time tighter. I leaned over the gunwale, and what I saw was not a hand at all, but a webbed paw dark and slick, the skin stretched thin between thick fingers like soft leather. It surfaced and pressed flat to the hull, testing, then turned so I could see the blunt nails and the pale underside. My mind fought for a name and found one that felt almost right and somehow wrong at the same time. Otter, but too big, far too big for this lake, for any story I had ever heard told around a dock. For a few shaky breaths, I clung to the easy answer anyway, the way a man clings to a dock line in a storm. A stray dog of the water, I told myself, nothing more. Push it off and keep fishing. Go home and laugh at yourself. I decided to push her away with the oar and head for shore. The boat rolled as I shifted, the world tilting toward the gray water. The paw slid away and then, as if to correct me, reappeared farther forward. A head followed, sleek, whiskered, the eyes set wide and startlingly dark. She rose only enough to clear the surface, those eyes fixed on me, not wild, not empty, and I felt my ribs tighten. She looked at me like she was asking for help. The thought came uninvited and would not leave. It was not a trick. It sat in my chest with a weight I could feel in my fingers. I kept my voice low, like talking to a skittish foal. "Easy," I said, "easy now." The oar trembled against my palm. The boat answered each tiny movement with a sway, the planks complaining in old wood groans. One bad slip and I would be in the water with her. The lake smelled of mud and old leaves, and under that, something sharp, like iron. She held my gaze, then dipped and resurfaced on the other side, quick and sure as if you and I were walking around a table. She bumped the hull with her shoulder, not a slam, a nudge. The nose of the boat drifted a hand's width toward the reeds. I pulled it back with a short stroke, and she nudged again, firmer. Another nudge, and the lilies bowed aside in a narrow path, as if she had gone this way many times. I tried to make it fit the rules I knew. Animals flee, or they bluff, or they bite. They do not guide. They do not look at you like that. A sound came from the reeds, not loud, a thin, caught note, like a whine stretched to a thread. I held still until my heartbeat softened enough that I could hear it again. There it was, a small, persistent cry that had the shape of need. I did not want to believe it. If I believed it, I would have to do something. I told myself I was an old man, alone in a wet wooden bowl, and the lake did not owe me a second chance if I stood and reached too far. She circled once more and rose higher, chest to the surface now, whiskers dripping. The water made tiny ticking sounds as it fell from her face. She blinked slow, and in that blink I felt something change between us, as if I had been measured and not found wanting. My throat worked. I tried to push her off with the flat of the oar, careful, gentle. She sank under it, not offended, not afraid, and came up closer to my hand. I could see scars across her muzzle, pale lines that caught the light. I could see the web between her fingers flex and tighten when she gripped the hull. She was no storybook thing. She had lived and fought and learned this lake like a map drawn under her skin. The cry from the reeds came again, a little breathless, a little weaker. The boat rocked under my knees. My weight shifted without my permission. The water reached up the side, cold through the wood. I told myself to leave. I told myself I had done enough by not hurting her, that whatever was happening belonged to the wild, and the wild knows its own. I set the oar to pull away, a clean stroke, and felt the blade catch. For a heartbeat, I thought I had hooked a root. Then the boat refused to move at all, held in place as surely as if a rope had been tied off somewhere I could not see. I looked down and saw her again, half under, half above, eyes never leaving mine, paw locked to the plank like a promise. I could feel the intent in the way she held, steady and patient, not dragging me under, not letting me go. But in that moment, she grabbed the boat again, refusing to let go. She began to pull me, not by force, but by insistence. The bow kept nosing toward the reeds as if a current ran only for us. Each time I corrected with the oar, she slid along the hull and nudged me back, patient as a tide. The lilies opened in a narrow seam and closed behind us with small, wet kisses. I told myself to stop this, to put my back into a hard stroke and break free, to make for open water where the rules were simple again. I even set my feet and lifted the oar. I thought I would stay out of it. The wild would sort itself out. A thin cry threaded the air, not the sharp call of a bird, not the croak of a frog. It had a shaking center like a breath that could not finish. I let the oar rest and listened with my whole body. The reeds whispered, then stilled. The sound came again, closer, weaker, as if wrapped in wet cloth. She surfaced beside my knee, eyes on mine, and I felt the bottom of my ribs go soft. I saw pleading in a wild animal's eyes for the first time. The boat slid into the thick of the reeds and stopped as if it had found a hidden dock. I leaned over, parting the green with my forearm. Mud rose and smeared the surface, and there, half swallowed by stringy weeds and a snarl of old line, was a small shape twisting in slow, tired circles. The little body was slick and shaking. A paw pawed at nothing. The cry was not loud. It did not need to be. It spoke straight to the part of me that remembered being somebody's son. The mother held fast to the hull and watched my hands. I could feel the judgment in me rise like a wall. Do not touch what you do not understand. Do not trust what wears whiskers and teeth. Let nature mind its own. I even pictured the safe way out. Push off hard, reach the cove, tell the story later with a shrug. My mind built that door, and then my heart would not walk through it. I shifted to my knees, careful not to capsize. The wood was slick under my palms. The scent of muck was heavy and old, like a cellar left shut too long. The pup's whiskers trembled with each ragged breath. A loop of clear line bit into the soft fur at the neck, and another held one leg pinned to the stems. I felt a flash of anger at the sight of that line, maybe mine, maybe anyone's, and then shame rolled over it, because anger would not free him. I spoke without choosing the words. Easy, little one. Easy now. My voice sounded borrowed from a younger man. The mother lowered herself until only her eyes remained, twin dark moons holding me steady. I had no right to ask it of her, but I asked anyway. Let me. She did not move. She did not leave. She did not show teeth. She just stayed, and in that staying I felt permission. I reached into the water and it took my breath with its cold. My fingers found the line, thin as a hair and mean as wire. It cut at my skin when I pulled. The pup twisted once, then went very still the way a child will when he understands you are trying to help. The reeds brushed my wrist. A beetle climbed onto my knuckle and then fell away. Every little thing was suddenly loud. The drip off the gunnel, the ticking of water against wood, the small wet cough the pup made when he tried to call again and couldn't. I worked the first loop free with the nail of my thumb, biting my lip when it refused to give. The mother rose an inch and then settled, and I realized I was sinking my breath to hers. For a second doubt surged. What if I hurt him? What if he bit? What if my clumsy old hands made it worse? And with it the old urge to flee, to let the world be wild without me. I looked at her, and the doubt thinned. There was no wildness in her gaze I needed to fear. There was only the long, patient ache of a mother waiting. I told myself once more to leave it to the lake, to let the reeds and water and time do their work, to let morning swallow this scene and carry me back to ordinary hours. My mouth even formed the words. I felt the oar under my knee, the old habit ready to lift and push and forget. But my heart couldn't bear it. I reached my hand to the pup. I slid my hand under the pup's belly and felt the cold pull of the muck give way like wet bread. The reeds rasped my wrist. The clear line bit my fingers again, mean and thin, and for a breath I hated it enough to shake. I pinched the closest loop and rolled it with my thumb until it loosened. The pup kicked once, then stilled like he understood the deal we were making. My sleeve soaked through to the shoulder. The lake climbed my skin and set its chill in my bones. The boat wobbled hard when I leaned farther. I grabbed the thwart with my free hand and waited for the tilt to settle. The mother pressed herself to the hull right where the sway began, her shoulder against the plank, her paw spread wide. I felt the boat steady under that small, stubborn weight. She held me up. That truth was as strange as the sight of her. I kept waiting for the flash of teeth, the hard slam, the quick lesson for daring to touch what belonged to her. But she lifted her face and watched my hands like she had given me a job and meant to see it done. I worked the next loop off the pup's hind leg. The line had cut a shallow groove in the fur. I wanted to swear at myself and at all of us who leave our mess behind, but there was only room for the work. The reeds ticked my forearm. A frog flicked away like a small muscle twitch in the water. The pup made a thin sound that barely reached my ear. I told him easy, one more, we're almost there, and it felt like I was talking to time itself. When I pulled, the muck took him back an inch, then let go with a soft burp that made my stomach flip. For a heartbeat his head dipped, and I thought I had lost him. I scooped under his chest and lifted. He was heavier than he looked, but not heavy like a burden, heavy like a promise. He coughed water and a string of plant stuff slid from his whiskers. His eyes opened in two small, dark shocks. He kicked again and then found me. He clung to my fingers like a child. Little padded hands, all web and warmth, latched on, not to fight, not to scratch, but to hold. The grip ran straight to my heart and pulled. I set him on the inside curve of the hull, half in water, half out. He shivered and then tucked his chin against my palm as if I were a bank he could press to and be safe. I said, "There you go," without meaning to, and the words came out thin with tears I hadn't thought I could still make. I looked to the mother. Every part of me expected the rush, the reclaim, the sharp correction. Instead, she stayed braced against the boat, keeping me from tipping, her body a quiet wall between me and the deep. Her whiskers twitched. She gave one soft huff that fogged the wet paint. I could smell the wild on her, clean and strong, a living thing that did not need my language to say thank you or hurry or careful now. I picked the last bite of line from the pup's neck. It freed with a tiny snap, and in that small sound, something in me let go too. The pup shook himself, a messy little tremor that sprayed my face with cold. He sneezed, made that breathless whine once more, and then nosed my knuckles like he had known them for years. I laughed, one short broken note, and right behind it came the fear again, late and honest, of what I had just done and what might come next. I lifted the pup toward the water and paused. The mother's eyes climbed to mine and held. I heard the creak of old wood, the hush of the reeds, the far-off call of a bird I could not name. For 1 second the world went so still it sounded like a held breath. Then she rose and took him, not a snatch, a careful taking. Her jaw worked with such care I could feel it in my own teeth. She turned him and supported him with her foreleg until he found his float. He squeaked in protest and then settled, pressed to her shoulder, his nose riding the edge of her fur like a little boat on a bigger boat. My knees went weak, and I sat back hard. The lake rocked me like a scolded child. I wiped my face with the back of my hand and came away with a mix of mud and lake and something salt that belonged to me. I thought that would be the end of it. A clean cut, a story with a point, and a polite bow from the wild before it vanished. But the mother did something that turned my heart. She took the pup from my hands the way a careful nurse lifts a newborn, jaw set just so, foreleg bracing his weight, the tiniest adjustment of her head so his mouth stayed clear of the water. I felt the warmth of him leave my palms, and, for a bare second, I wanted to take him back, to hold him just a breath longer, to prove to myself that this had happened. The boat rocked once, a slow nod, and steadied. She did not bolt. She did not vanish into the green. She stayed. We looked straight at each other. No splash, no warning hiss, no show of teeth. Only those dark eyes, level with mine over the rim of the boat, as if we stood on the same small ground. A dragonfly clicked between us, and I barely heard it. There was a stillness that did not belong to weather. It felt chosen. The pup tucked his face into the thick fur of her shoulder, and the sound he made was not fear anymore. It was a soft, tired thank you I felt more than heard. I waited for the rules I knew to arrive and collect me. Wild things do not meet your gaze. Wild mothers do not linger. Men do not read meaning in whiskers and silence. But she held me there, and then, without hurry, she lowered her head to the side of the boat. Not a shove, not a headbutt, a bow. She set her brow against the old paint and kept it there, just long enough to be sure I understood it wasn't accident. I felt the animal was thanking me. The words came into my mouth and sat there with weight. I have lived a long time on this lake and thought I knew the shapes of gratitude. A neighbor's handshake, a pie left on a porch, a long letter written by a shaky hand. I did not know it could wear whiskers and smell of river mud. I did not know it could arrive as a quiet lowering of the head, a grace offered across the thin board between our worlds. Something in my chest loosened with a small, painful tear, like a knot pulled free after years. Her whiskers trembled. The pup pressed closer, small paws patting her fur in a blind search for what was safest and most certain. She lifted her head again and held me with that same even look. I almost said "You're welcome," and the words scared me for how right they felt. I put my hand flat to the plank where her brow had been, and the wood kept the warmth a moment, as if it had taken the message and would pass it on if I failed to. If your heart is holding its breath right now, you understand. Subscribe. This is where the real truths of nature live. A thin wind carried the smell of wet reed and iron. Somewhere behind me a bird called twice and fell quiet. She could have gone then. Every law I trusted said she should go. Instead, she stayed at my side like a quiet sentinel, the boat lightly touching her shoulder, the pup tucked safe. I did not move. I did not dare to. I did not want to break whatever thin bridge had arched between us. I was sure they would swim off and I would never see them again, that this would be a story with a clean edge I could lay down in a few careful sentences over coffee someday. I even reached for the oar to turn the bow toward the open water, to leave them to their lives and take mine back up where I had dropped it. But this was only the beginning. I sat there stunned, the oar resting across my knees, feeling the boat breathe under me like a tired animal. The reeds whispered themselves closed where we'd come through. The surface went smooth again, and for a few slow seconds I told myself the lake was stitching up the morning, tucking the wild back where it belonged. A ripple traveled out and thinned to nothing. I let out a long breath I didn't know I was holding and felt the ache of it in my ribs. It would be a memory now, I thought, bright and strange and already slipping. The water shivered, just a small tremor at the bow, the kind you blame on wind you can't feel. I peered over the side and saw nothing but my own face, old and pale, floating on the skin of the lake. I said out loud that it was done, that they were gone, that I should make for open water, put the sun at my back, and go home to coffee and the quiet clatter of a house that still knew my steps. The boat moved without me, a gentle push, then another. I dipped the oar, and it caught on air. The bow turned toward the long run of bank where the birches lean, the place I beach the boat when I am too tired to lift it to the rack. I looked down, expecting to see a snag or the slow pull of current. Instead, she rose, shoulder first, as if she carried the weight of my little craft like a friend's parcel. The pup's head surfaced beside her for a breath and then tucked again into her fur. She nudged the plank with her brow, and the boat glided a hand's width closer to shore. I laughed once, helpless and a little afraid. "No," I said, like a man telling a good dog not to follow him across the road. She didn't stop. Another steady push. The lilies parted in a soft hush. The mud smell grew richer, edged with the sweetness of crushed reed. I tried to paddle against it, just to see if I could, and the boat hesitated the way a stubborn horse does when it knows a better path than the one you want. She fell back, let me test my will, then came alongside and set her shoulder again. This time, I didn't fight her. She cared for me like I cared for her pup. The thought landed whole, without argument. It embarrassed me for how simple and impossible it was. I felt something like gratitude and something like shame wrap around the same breath. How many times had I cursed the wind for pushing me wrong, or the water for not giving me what I wanted, when all along I might have been led. I put the oar across the gunwales and let my hands rest. The boat slid in a slow, certain line. My heart climbed and fell in odd steps, part fear, part relief, part a kind of reverence that made me want to whisper. She kept to my side, not crowding, not leaving. When the bank rose up shadowed and close, she shifted to the stern and gave 2 short bumps that squared me to the shallows. It was the sort of practical help you get from an old friend who has done this 1,000 mornings and knows you are not as strong as you used to be. I glanced back at her and she held my eyes once more, calm as a priest at a bedside. The pup surfaced, blinked, and made a small, breathy chirr that felt like a benediction. The keel kissed mud. The sound of it was soft and final. I set the oar down and reached for the shore with my boots, testing the bottom. It took my weight, cool and certain. I turned to thank her, ridiculous as that was, and found her still there, waiting for the last of me to be safe. I wanted to name it caretaking. I wanted to name it grace. I had no name big enough for it. I was sure it was a coincidence. I told myself she'd only been following a route she knew, that the pushes were habit, that I had read meaning into motion because I needed a story to make sense of my shaking hands. I even tried to laugh at myself, to put it all back into a box labeled luck and leave it on the shelf with other harmless lies we live with. The laugh didn't come. The truth sat in my chest like a small, warm stone. I swung a leg over and stepped into the shallows. The water rose around my ankles and let me go. I hauled the bow up by the painter and turned to look for her, to see her disappear into the green at last and take my words with her. But when I set foot on shore, the real shock was waiting. I turned and the shore was not empty. In the shallow crescent between the birch roots and the reed wall, shapes waited. Sleek backs, wet heads, whiskers bright with drip. Not one splash, not one scramble. A small company of otters held their ground and watched me the way people do at a door they have decided to open only once. My boot pressed into the mud and made a slow, sucking sound. No one moved. The mother slid to the edge beside me and the pup rose with her, chest on her foreleg, mouth open in a soft, breathy chirr that landed in my ribs like a tiny bell. Another head surfaced to my left, then 2 more above the weed line, only eyes and noses at first, then whole faces. They arranged themselves in a rough half-circle, water to knee-deep, reeds at their backs, me at the center point on land, as if I had been called to stand there. I felt every year of my age, and also something young, waking up inside it. I expected the first hiss, the first scatter. It did not come. Their silence had weight. It did not feel like fear. It felt like we were all waiting for the same simple thing to happen, and no one wanted to scare it away. The mother raised her chin, and I noticed the scars I had seen in the boat were not the only marks. Another, older otter carried a pale line down his shoulder, a story written in healed skin. He blinked at me, slow as the turn of a page. Behind him a smaller one slid up on a root and lay with its chin flat, eyes wide and shining. The pup's sound came again, a thin thread that tugged at my hands even though they were empty now. He worked one paw against the mother's chest and stared at me like he was memorizing my face. The thought fell into me with a clear click. They knew what I had done, not in pieces, not as accidents, but as a single clean act. I felt the old ache that lives behind pride and before tears. I was the only person they trusted with this. The sentence came whole and stood in me. I didn't deserve it, and I did. That was the shape of it. The water lapped once at my boot and left a dark ring. A dragonfly lit on the birch root and left. A crow called somewhere up the ridge, and it sounded like it had been warned to keep quiet. I tried to swallow, but my throat had gone to paper. I wanted to say something ordinary and good. Thank you. You're safe now. Go on. But my mouth stayed open, and no words came. The old otter slid forward a hand's length, lifted, and let a mussel roll from his mouth to the wet sand. It bumped my toe and rested there, blue-black, banded with a pale scar like the one on his shoulder. He didn't bare his teeth or snatch it back. He just looked at me, and then at the shell, and then at me again, as if to be sure I had seen it. I bent without thinking and set my fingers on the smooth curve. It felt warm from him. I did not pick it up. I did not dare to make this into a trick I could put in my pocket. I thought it would all end here, a quiet fading, a slow turn, each head sliding back into the lake, the wild retaking its right shape, and me with one strange morning to carry home like a lantern. I even stepped back to give them space, to let the circle break without me. But then the impossible happened. She came closer to the bank until the ripples kissed my boots. The others held their crescent and watched, silent and sure, as if they had all agreed this part belonged to her alone. She rose in the shallows, water sliding off her shoulders in thin strings, and looked straight into me. Not through me, into me, like a question and an answer arriving at the same time. I felt my hands lift without asking permission from my head. I told myself the moment was over, that the lake had given what it came to give and would now take back its mystery. She did not leave. She stayed eye to eye with me, the pup pressed to her side, his whiskers trembling. Then she made a movement I have never seen a wild thing make. She lifted her foreleg and reached. Not a swat, not a warning. She turned the webbed paw so the pads faced me, the way a person would offer a hand across a gap. Drops hung from the short fur and fell in a slow line between us. I forgot to breathe. I could see the small, pale scars across her knuckles. I could see the flex and soften as she held the gesture steady, asking nothing and saying everything. Something old and stubborn in me gave way. I brought my hand up, palm open, fingers spread as if mirroring her. The air between us felt charged, like the thin space before a storm breaks. The world shrank to her eyes and the slow lift of my wrist. The pup made a tiny sound, not fear now, but a soft push toward what was happening. I moved closer. Her paw hovered over the skin of the water, then rested on the thin sheen like it could carry more than weight. My palm came to a stop a breath away. In that moment, I knew a human and a wild animal could be one. It was not a thought I built. It was a truth that arrived whole and stood there, simple and impossible. My hand hovered, the heat of my skin meeting the cold that rose off the lake. I felt the ache of wanting to cross the last inch and the equal ache of knowing the inch mattered. We held there together, two open hands separated by a film of water and a lifetime of rules. She did not flinch. I did not press. It felt like meeting at the exact edge of what was right. The old one shifted behind her, as if to witness. The younger otters lay flatter, their attention quiet and heavy. The birches lifted a breeze and set it down again. I could smell wet reed and iron and the faint sweetness of crushed lilies. She lowered her paw, slow as a blessing, and tapped the hull once, a soft, hollow note that echoed down the years I had spent on this lake. Then she lifted it again and held it where my hand waited, as if to be sure I understood that the first touch was not the whole of it. I almost laughed with the relief of it. I almost cried with the cost of it. My chest carried both at once and did not break. I whispered, "You're safe," and it felt less like words and more like a promise passing between us in a language older than either of us could claim. The pup nosed her elbow. She tipped her head toward him, as if to say, "Remember," and then brought her gaze back to me for one more long, level second. I decided I would never see this miracle again, that it had bloomed once and would now fold itself away like a night flower no daylight could touch. I stepped back a half step to give them room to slip under and vanish, to let the lake erase my footprints and leave me with a story I would spend the rest of my days failing to tell properly. She held my eyes a heartbeat longer, then drew a slow circle in the shallows with her paw, a sign on the water I felt in my bones. The others eased back, not in flight, but in order, heads turning as if waiting for a cue only they could hear. The mother eased away last, her shoulder brushing the hull in a careful goodbye, the pup riding the curve of her neck. She dipped once, and the surface stilled so clean it looked like glass poured into the shape of a lake, but nature had a counterblow waiting. I went home on legs that didn't feel like mine. I wiped the mud from my boots on the rag by the door and left the boat half pulled up, as if finishing the job might close the day before I had learned how to carry it. Inside, the house was too bright and too quiet. I poured water, didn't drink it, set it down, and stood at the window looking at my own face in the glass until the light went thin and gray and slipped away. I told myself it was over, that the lake had given me a mercy I wouldn't earn twice. I could lie down, sleep, wake, and fold this morning into the shelf where I keep the few holy things I've been allowed. I thought that was the end of it. A clean seam, a story with a bow, the kind of miracle you write once on the inside of your chest and then never touch again. Night came soft as soot. The birches were just pale bones against the slope. The air had that cool sweetness it gets when the day's heat lets go. I stepped outside to hook the painter higher, an old habit, and the moon slid out from behind a thin cloud and laid a road of light across the water. The lake was glass poured flat, every star a pinprick caught in its skin. I stood there with my hand on the rope and felt the hush lean in. A small circle opened on the surface halfway to the reeds. No sound, only a wrinkle in the moon's path. Then another. I told myself it was a fish coming to breathe, a turtle testing the skin of night, any old ordinary thing. My heart didn't believe me. It went tight and still the way it does when you see a familiar figure where no one should be. The circle widened and closed. A shadow turned under it. Then a paw rose from the black water, slow and sure, webbing spread, the pads pale in the moonlight like those small planets you can see on a clear winter night if you look just to the side of them. It hovered there, a hand where no hand should ever be, and my breath stopped in my throat as if it had found a ledge and refused to climb any higher. The paw tipped once toward me, a quiet, deliberate greeting or a farewell, I cannot say, and then rested against the hull with a touch so soft I felt it in the rope under my fingers. My heart stalled like an old outboard. She was saying goodbye. I didn't call out. I didn't dare. I stepped to the edge of the water, and the mud took my boot and let it go again. She rose enough that her eyes lifted into the moon's long stripe and found mine the way they had that morning. The pup came up beside her, smaller, the whiskers silvered, his nose hardly clearing the surface. He made that thin, breathy sound, and it ran the length of me like a wire drawn tight and plucked once. I knelt. The night pressed close, full of small sounds, crickets sawing, a far owl, the light tick of wavelets against the bow, but inside the circle of our looking there was only a silence so deep it felt like space itself holding us in place. She set her brow against the wood the way she had before, a respectful weight, a gesture I will not be able to explain even to myself when I try. I put my palm to the same spot, and the plank warmed under it as if it remembered both of us. "Thank you," I said, and the word left my mouth as a warmer breath than the air could carry. Another word rode behind it without asking my leave. "I'm sorry." I didn't list the reasons. The night knew them. The lake knew them. She held there a heartbeat longer, then lifted and drew a small circle on the surface with her paw, a sign repeated, a lesson underlined. The pup touched his paw to the same place, clumsy and earnest, and for a stinging instant I was certain he was practicing a language I had only just learned to hear. I understood then, clear as the moonlight. The wild had shown me wisdom and gratitude, and both were larger than the names I had for them. She had steadied my boat. She had entrusted me with what she loved most. She had led me home. And now, at the very edge of the day, she had come back to close the circle with a grace I would have sworn no animal could carry, until I saw it carried, and offered, and set down gently where I could never lose it. Tremor took my hands. Not fear now, not only. Something like worship, something like grief, both at once, the way a man shakes when he realizes he has been wrong his whole life in a way that saved him anyway. Tears came without heat and left my face cold. I let them. The ground under my knees felt honest and simple. The moon slid a finger width higher. The birches whispered and were still. I thought of all the mornings I had cut through this water, believing I understood its moods, its rules, its reach. I thought of the line biting the pup's neck, thin and clear and careless as we are when we think the world exists for us to use. I thought of the bow of her head, the impossible offer of that open paw, the way she had held my gaze without owning me or needing me to be anything but exactly what I was in that hour. A man who could help and be helped. The paw lowered. The ripple closed. She and the pup slipped under as if the lake drew a curtain. The road of moonlight lay unbroken again. I stayed on my knees a long time with my hand on the boat and my mouth open around a prayer I did not know how to finish. When I finally stood, my legs shook so much I had to rest a hand on the bow to steady them. The rope felt rough and good and real. I tied the knot the way my father taught me and tested it twice, not because I doubted the knot, but because I wanted to touch a thing I could still tie down. I still don't believe it happened, but I saw it with my own eyes. And I know this now. Animals are wiser than we think. If you believe in a special bond with animals, right, we are not alone in this world.